Indeed, it's a pleasure for me and David to be with you today. Let's indeed see how the fashion game is changing. The fashion industry has always been highly transitional, dynamic, and exciting. And indeed, what we believe is that we have witnessed drastic shifts over the past 20 years, right? Particularly since 2005, when there was the WTO phase-out of textile quotas, of course, but also since 2008, when the financial crisis happened. The world has changed, and indeed, so has the fashion business. The world has gone online. The digital revolution has brought a new type of consumer, indeed. The consumer who is today totally empowered and extremely well informed. As you all experience, the consumer is impatient and fickle. He wants the latest fashion item fast and is constantly searching for the next big thing. Look at Shanghai in 1990 and today. This is a very nice example of how quickly the world has changed. And the world has changed extremely fast in China, but also in the fashion industry. The fashion market has become one, if not, I will say, the fastest moving market on the planet. It requires brands and really retailers to pick up on trends very rapidly, right away, while doing it responsibly. And considering now how globalized, expansive most brands are, with shops and supply chain that spread all across the world, the dynamic in the fashion industry have shifted significantly. The balance of power has completely shifted from top-bottom to bottom-up. We see the emergence of new business models that are now far more collaborative, in the sense that the consumer now holds the power. They have become their own provider, be it service of content. If you think about Uber, Alibaba, Airbnb, or Facebook, well, Facebook is one of the world's most popular media owner, but indeed it creates no content, right? It relies completely on consumer content. So something interesting is happening, as indicated by Tom Goodwin. All these new business models rely heavily on consumer assets. Today, consumers are taking an active role in all businesses and are highly influential. And this is true in fashion as well. Consumers act as designers when they participate typically to Fab Lab. They act as vendors when they sell on consumer-to-consumer sites. And they almost act like shareholders when they join, for example, crowdfunding activity for new fashion designer, right? So the world has completely changed. The digital revolution made all this possible. We have now entered an area of hyperconnectivity and information. The millennials are addicted to their smartphone, but really, so are baby boomers. And the interesting thing about it is that baby boomers now have stronger purchasing power than ever. Every store in the world sits comfortably in their pocket. So the mall experience, once a favorite pastime, hanging out with friends, is less attractive maybe than it was before. And this is what the millennials are bringing to the marketplace. The difference in consumer behavior is partially enabled by technology and internet, but most of all by just having a different lifestyle. And in all of that, sustainability and cause-based retailing are no longer PR stunts. It's of real concern to these consumers. Ever since the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh, fashion companies have been pressurized to produce responsibly, taking care of the environmental and social impact of their manufacturing activity. Not all consumers are really ready to pay a premium yet, but they are all getting increasingly conscious, as the fashion revolution movement shows us here. And as a result, the supply chain is in complete disruption. It's in complete disruption because consumers decide what product they want and where they will purchase it. This has a significant impact, of course, on garment sourcing. It's not all about apparel company pushing product to consumer who might sometimes reject it. It's more about consumer pulling it, being explicit in what they want, when they want, and fast. And indeed, when you think about the supply chain, it used to be highly sequential in the early 2000s, right? From planning, design, development of sample, then selection, sourcing, production, and finally transportation and store replenishment, stage by stage. Today, supply chains are far more integrated. All these production stages happen in a shorter time frame and with far more interaction than before. As product development tends to happen at the very last minute to follow the latest consumption trend, it must become extremely reactive, extremely agile. To reduce lead time, fashion companies have no other choice but to gain flexibility. Manufacturers who are indeed able to provide value-added services in product development will definitely gain mindshare with fashion brands and retailers. But not only are we moving from a sequential to an integrated type of supply chain, on top of that, we see the emergence of new value chain. In the early 2000s, supply chains were push-based, with companies pushing product to the warehouse before delivering to the consumers. But in the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen the emergence of the pull value chain due to the prevalence of fast fashion houses. Indeed, when you think about it, Inditex with Zara was one of the first companies to base its production on point-of-sale data coming from the stores with highly integrated and strictly regulated processes. And this has been, the recipe to enable Zara to renew product in the store every 2 weeks. Very fast, right? And when fast fashion brands started to proliferate, the relationship between the manufacturers and the supplier became more cooperative. Brands and retailers began to negotiate with their manufacturing suppliers, who in turn adjusted their production processes in order to be, one, more flexible, and second, of course, to be able to deliver smaller orders with a wider variety of styles. So major change. So operational excellence and reactivity in manufacturing became key criteria. So operational excellence, responsiveness are key criteria, but also value-added services. Again, today brands and retailers expect manufacturing suppliers to take over some of the product development and sampling activity for them, moving again to a more cooperative strategy. What we also find extremely interesting at Lectra is to note that innovation, both in terms of processes and technologies, that were initially used in the pull value chain, so by fast fashion houses, start now to be implemented in more traditional supply chain, changing radically the way supply chain works. So really, a supply chain that is in total disruption. And what we see as well is that, of course, long-term sustainability is becoming a major global concern. Major brands, retailers, and manufacturers today are forming sustainable coalition, collaborating together to transform the industry. Brands, retailers, manufacturing are collaborating to implement supply chain transparency. And they are pioneering some assessment tool. Of course, we all know about the IG index to assess the impact of manufacturing activity on the environment, but also system-wide collaboration. And indeed, ensuring sustainability requires, in our view, a fully collective, collaborative action on a global scale. And all these changes, disruptive changes, are happening extremely rapidly. They require all stakeholders in the value chain to reconsider existing processes and technologies in order to be streamlined, responsive, and to make the change more sustainable. But that's not it. What we see also are major changes in terms of demographics. And indeed, when you look at the fashion retail sales estimated at 1.7 trillion in 2020, you will come to realize that the growth is mainly coming from the so-called BRIC countries, and that China is taking a lion's share. In 2020, China will represent 19% of the worldwide fashion retail revenue. Having earned today $267 billion in 2014, China's consumer market is presently the world's largest market, even surpassing the US. So of course, this has implications because companies are trying to expand, the retail activities in China, but also because on the production side, manufacturers in China will keep some of the capacity that was previously used for export market for the domestic market. So this implies, again, more changes in manufacturing. More changes because we expect the cost of manufacturing in China to continue to increase, indeed, as highlighted in this survey from BCG. This is because China is using some of its production capacity to serve its domestic market, and because its living conditions are improving, that obviously we expect manufacturing costs to continue to rise. Furthermore, you may have heard about the Made in China 2025 program that has been developed by the Chinese government. The aim of this program is to improve innovation and the quality of the product manufactured in China. So guess what? All that together will kind of normalize the industry in China, and we'll see the cost continue to increase in our view. But that's not only it. Of course, we all experience currently in our different organizations shifting currencies. Shifting currencies are balancing today the global production cost because typically it makes Europe more cost competitive, right? So Eastern Europe typically today is at level of manufacturing costs that are close to the one in China. And that's not it. What we see also are the impact of the trade agreements. And you certainly know that a recent agreement has been signed called the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, signed between 12 Pacific Rim nations, among which the US, Canada, Japan, Mexico, Peru, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, but also Vietnam. And clearly reduced tariffs in the US, Japan are expecting to benefit very much Vietnamese garment manufacturers. Why? Because the labor costs have given them, and also the established garment industries have given them a competitive advantage. But of course, the one who will certainly benefit most are the ones who have been investing in new processes, new technology to serve this new customer base. Similarly, as shown by this survey from McKinsey, proximity sourcing certainly provides new opportunities for manufacturers who have invested in know-how, innovation, and operational excellence to manage seasonable fashion items for which short-term lead times are necessary. So most of the fashion companies, as you see here, are considering today proximity sourcing more important, 69% of them, right? And indeed, Adidas has recently announced a series of relocation of its production activity from Asia to Europe. What does it mean? Bringing production closer to the consumer market, right? And this will certainly help, but this is not the answer to everything, right? It's not just because you are closer that everything is going to be solved. When you look at current lead times, indeed, a lot of time and money can still be saved, notably in product development, production planning, and production itself. So this implies that we will need new sourcing policy and a completely new supply chain approach in order to succeed. And that brings me to sourcing. Sourcing has been evolving a lot in the recent years. And now I will leave it to David to explain you how we see garment sourcing evolving indeed.
Thank you, Françoise. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
We are now in the midst of a sourcing revolution. It's a slow time revolution. It began around the beginning of the new millennium, 2000, and at this point we're about halfway through the revolution. The fact that it's a slow revolution does not mean that it is unimportant. The factories that are in the vanguard will be the ones that survive. The customers that are in the vanguard of this change will be the ones that survive. Those that don't follow through will face very serious problems. Can I have a new slide, please?
This is a new slide, David?
Yes, very good. Okay. We're moving from competitive to cooperative and collaborative. This identifies the full nature of sourcing. This new slide. For 40 years, sourcing was all about FOB, competitive sourcing. This was the era of marauding garmento. If a supplying factory offered a reduction of 2 cents, the buyer would move from one factory to the new factory. In the era of marauding garmentos, everything was acceptable. Customers would place the same orders with 2 factories. If the merchandise sold well at retail, then everybody was happy. If the merchandise did not sell well at retail, well, then the QC people could walk into one of the factories and reject the goods. This was the era of the LC scam. Imagine you are a factory making T-shirts. A customer comes to you with this enormous order. 3 months full capacity. You discuss price is agreed. The only issue is delivery. And the delivery has to be made very much on time. Well, you go to the Circular Knit people who tell you, well, it's 125 grams single jersey. I can give you any quantity you want immediately. The dyers, they're lined up. So you go back to the buyer and say, okay, everything's okay, we're going to go ahead. Now you're waiting for the LC. Week, 2 weeks go by, you get a little disturbed because you can't really buy the fabric until you have the LC. And you finally email the buyer what happened, and the buyer comes back immediately and says, oh, this is terrible, I'm terribly upset. The woman in charge of letters of credits had an accident, was in the hospital, but she will be returning to work on the coming Monday, and I will ensure your LC is open at once. Okay, now these things happen. Monday comes, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, still no LC. You get back to the guy, and he says, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'll check into it. Now you're getting a little frightened. This is a big order. There's real profit, but if the order doesn't exist, then you've lost 3 months production. So you get back to the buyer, and the buyer says, we have a problem. It's a little difficult, but I'm going to solve the problem, and I'll get back to you. 48 hours, the buyer gets on the phone, just as you are totally despairing, and says, everything's okay, the LC has been opened, go ahead and buy the fabric. You're excited, you rush in, buy the fabric, you have it dyed, fabric's delivered, you still don't have the LC. Now you're a little frightened. You're sitting there with 300 kilos of puce, 1,000 kilos of chartreuse, you're in real trouble. And they can't get the LC. I mean, you can see at this point, you're going to have to take your children out of private school, you have to get a mortgage on your house. You call up the guy, the buyer, and he said, what happened? He said, it's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. What happens is that my boss was fired, a new person came and took his job, and the new person has rejected the order. But I assure you, I'm going to help you. I'm going to straighten this out for you. Now you're really upset. 3 days later, the buyer comes back and says, everything is okay. I have spoken to my boss's boss on your behalf, and I have told my boss's boss that if they don't reinstate this order, that I will resign my job after 22 years. And they finally agreed, provided you allowed a discount, 40%. You come back and say, well, 40%, that's terrible. He said, look, I've done everything I can for you. Either accept it or reject it. There's nothing more I can say. If you accept it, you'll have an LC in 48 hours. Well, what choice do you have? So that in the end, you accepted the order at less 40%, just to keep the factory going, and you think the buyer was your friend. The reality is your buyer planned this from the very beginning. This is how the marauding Garmento worked. In about the year 2000, the more substantial, responsible garment brands and importers started to realize that maybe FOB wasn't everything. Maybe we need some sort of cooperative relationship with our supplier. It isn't that the garment customers have suddenly found religion. Rather, they finally found out the secret of cost accounting. They started looking at what we call macro costs, the cost of doing business in a country. The reality is that no one works in the truly cheap labor countries. Who among you is going to rush out to do business in the Democratic Republic of Korea, or the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the Democratic Republic of Schmidland? You have problems you're working in North Korea, you got problems, you have damaged goods, you want to put in a claim with a glorious leader, no problem. 15 years later, after they release you from re-education camp, you go home. It is not about the cost of labor, it's basically about doing business in the country. You have indirect costs. Why do people still do business in India? Why in China? Everybody talks about leaving China, but China is still the world's largest garment exporting country, 6 times larger than number 2 Bangladesh. And according to the latest information, China is very well holding their own. Bangladesh is not. The problem is that China, even though they pay their workers $600 a month, compared to $68 a month in Bangladesh, they can supply better quality, more reliable delivery and service, and a more efficient operation. They can help you reduce costs. We tend to think that all costs are intrinsic, that are related directly to the order and are necessary to the order. The fabric, the trim, the labor, the freight, the duty, these are the intrinsic costs. We don't realize that the major costs are extrinsic, that they're outside this area, and the buying office commission, product development, and most of all, markdowns. Direct costs are still important, but they're certainly much less important than the macro costs and the indirect costs. There's a partnership between the customer and the factory based on mutual profit. New slide, please. How do you implement a cooperative supply chain? The first thing you do is you start looking at costs. And what do you realize? In today's world, the factory has little control over FOB. You, the customer, go to the mill, source the fabric, agree on a price, and then tell the factory to buy the fabric. The same is true about trim, where you decide what trim they're going to use. What is less is the CM, the manufacturing cost, and that is about 5% of the total cost of the total cost of the garment. What is important here are the extrinsic costs, the commission 2%, the product development 4%, the markdown 35%. Altogether, these extrinsic costs, which are not related to a specific style, total 41% of the total cost of the garment. Why bother at the 5% when this is 41%? You ask yourself, why are there markdowns? Well, there are markdowns because the good styles sell at once. The bad styles don't sell at all. Pink and green sell, but blue and yellow don't sell. Large and XL sell, small, medium do not sell. Why is this? What is the problem? And the problem is actually speed to market. Think about Zara, H&M, Topshop. How do they do it? How does Zara do trial orders? They move fast enough, so fast, that they can afford to do these trial orders. That is, the fabric comes in, they run 10 styles through samples, and they order 2,000 pieces of a style. If you have 6,000 stores, 2,000 pieces is not a big quantity. And then they see, if 5 styles sell, that's where they put the orders. That's where they put the money. If 3 styles sell, that's where they put the money. If no styles sell, well, they redesign at 10 more styles. In a sense, through trial orders, they are designing after sales. Without cooperative strategies, neither the customer nor the supplier can move forward. On the customer side, customers today are sending engineers into their supplier factories to produce fast turn. The customers want product development. Well, it's not a question of sending an email to the customer, to the supplier, rather than say, give me product development. They have to send technicians into their factories to show them how to develop, develop the style, how to start with a sketch and wind up with a sample which is acceptable for production. Remember, product development is not only lower costs, obviously by moving the work from New York and London into China. It is also about reduced lead times. The product cycle today is approximately 40+ weeks, and about 75% is product development. You move the product development to the factory, and you're saving time. We did a project a few years ago, and in a factory that was totally vertical, producing fine gauge cut and sew, 9,000 workers, and in the course of that project, we reduced lead time on product development to 21 days. We set up a small office in London. Main customers were UK based, and we sent designers there. And so that if the designer in the customer's end wanted to talk to the factory, they picked up a phone and the factory took a taxi to them. All we cared about at that time were two things, the hit rate and the sell-through. What percentage of the garments that were ordered, the styles that were ordered, came from substantial work that our designers carried out? And then what were the markdown rates on those styles? In the beginning, the hit rates were very low. Within a year, our hit rates were above 50% of the total styles ordered by the customer. And the markdown rate, when we finished the project after 20 months, was below 5%. At that point, the customer no longer cared about CM, no longer cared about FOB, no longer cared about DDP. The customer cared about the net profit that he was making on the goods we were producing. And they were making more money from this factory than any other supplier. That is the new direction of a cooperative strategy. On the supplier side, the biggest change that you have to make in the factory is greater productivity. When we did the project in India, we recognized that Indian productivity was only 50% of China. If the Chinese factory made a shirt in 22 minutes, the Indian shirt was 44 minutes. We decided that we could increase productivity by 25%. That is to reduce lead times, production times, rather from 44 minutes to 33 minutes. Remember, this is still 50% longer than China. The savings were enormous. There's a reason for this. Compare direct labor with overhead. Direct labor are the people who touch the garment and produce it. Overhead is everything else. Overhead is the management. Overhead is the manager of his car, his mistress, the whole lot. That's overhead. In the West, where wages are high and overhead is relatively low, overhead equals about 70% of labor, with the result that the benefit of increased productivity is lower labor costs. In Asia, where wages are low and overhead's enormous, for example, it costs more to turn on the lights in New Delhi than in New York, the overhead could be as much as 6 times the cost of labor. This means that if you can increase productivity by 25% and give that 25% added to the wages, the savings on overhead would be such that the savings would be greater than the total labor cost. It would be as if the worker, who's now earning 25% more, was coming to your factory to work for nothing. In fact, he was going to be paying you 9 cents a garment just for the privilege of being there. This is the direction that the factories have to move. The question you ask is, well, if we bring all these services, these services to the factory, and all of these things they can do, will those services be transferred to our competitive customers who will working in the same factory? And the answer is yes. No question about it. But one thing that these customers have recognized is that benefit for all is better than benefit for nobody. This is the coalition of the willing. Competitors are potential allies. I'm talking about brand labels joining together for a common goal and bringing their factories together for a common goal. For example, sustainability, which we talked about before. This is a very important factor. The consumer wants greater sustainability. In the beginning, it was passive. There were organizations that would measure sustainability, that would help. Today, the customer is taking sustainability in hand. The successful customers have brought in engineers, they have brought in chemists, and they are deciding where to increase sustainability. We live in an industry which is basically an oligopsony, to use the term in economics. 50 customers control 70% of total garment imports in the United States, and 50 customers also control 70% of the garment imports into Europe. You put together 20 to 25 of these customers in a group, and they have tremendous power. This is exactly what's happened. For example, in India, it takes 1,100 liters of water to produce one T-shirt. I'm not joking. The reason behind this is that the Indian government subsidizes the farmers with free electricity. So the farmer keeps the pumps of the irrigation going 24 hours a day. Esquel, the largest shirt maker in the world, produces fine cotton in Xinjiang province, which is a total desert. They do it by the drip method. They produce their cotton. Their savings on water is uncountable compared to what is being done in India. Customers are going to the Indian producers and say, if you cannot save water, we don't want to be there. It's about water. It's about saving water consumption. It's about water treatment. It's about removing toxic chemicals and carcinogenic chemicals from the textile production. And in this regard, the customers have gone to the big dye stuff producers, the chemists, and the chemists are working together to move towards sustainability. This is a practical goal where competing customers and competing factories are now working together. Going forward, there is a move, a beginning of a move, of customers joining together to find new country production. Ethiopia is a prime example. Customers who come together to work in Ethiopia. This is a country which has no ports, no electricity, no logistics, no infrastructure. The customers feeling by working together with the government, they can build an industry. The next step has to be to understand the need to bring in the international institutions. If they want to have the electricity, the roads, the network, the logistics, the infrastructure, somebody has to put up $1 billion or more. The customers can't do it. The Ethiopian government can't do it. The World Bank can do it. It works this way. If the customers can bring in 100,000 jobs, which is not a large number in our industry, and if those jobs have good compliance, good working conditions, then 100,000 jobs means that $1 billion equals $10,000 investment per job, which is not unreasonable. The World Bank wants to go into projects today that have meaningful, quantifiable results. Unfortunately, the customers have yet to really make this move. We are a long way from truly collaborative strategies, but we have a beginning. In the end of the day, this industry will be dominated by cooperative and collaborative sourcing. Françoise, back to you.
Okay, thank you, David. So from what we learned from David, well, there is one thing we can certainly conclude, is that we can't keep looking at the same part of the balance sheet anymore, only focusing on labor cost or highly focusing on labor cost. We need to rethink, we need to re-angle, we need to readjust. And all these point to the emergence of a new paradigm for factories, as described in a recent analysis from McKinsey. A paradigm where indeed manufacturers must further leverage their know-how, invest in innovative, lean plant models, and propose really value-added services to their customer to drive new supply chain approaches, more collaborative approaches. Building a highly innovative, collaborative supply chain via a digital framework is, of course, as we've seen earlier on, essential to the success of fashion. And this is where indeed Lectra comes in. So just for you who are not that familiar with Lectra, let me a little bit introduce the company. Lectra is set to accompany its fashion customers and indeed its complete supply chain in their growth, chain strategy, and their quest for operational excellence. And we have been doing so indeed for the last 40 years. Which leads me to the next point. Expertise is critical for us. We have been working with brands, retailers, and manufacturers. We don't only advise them on how to implement the changes, we follow through, indeed. We have a base of business consultants supported by seasoned experts, specializing in collaborative 3D product development, PLM, lean operations, project management, IT integration, to name a few. And 200 of them are at the service of our customers, with an additional 290 people indeed in customer care. So expertise for us is a key element. Accessibility, we are thorough, as I just mentioned. We offer a step-by-step approach in terms of change management to help companies design and manage a change all the way through with the implementation. And of course, as a company, we are innovative and up-to-date. We invest heavily in R&D. Typically, we dedicate 9% of our revenue to R&D every year in order to come up with the best and smartest solution for our customer. We are definitely firm believers of lean, and indeed, Lectra brings best lean practices from also other industries, as you can see on this slide, like furniture and automotive. And working with the automotive car seat manufacturers, typically Johnson Controls, typically Toyota Boshoku, Lectra has been widely exposed and contributive to the most advanced lean implementation. So we are now keen to see and to develop those in the apparel industry. Of course, we are well seasoned in fashion. I mentioned the 40 years of expertise. We bring our customer lean operation, agile product development, and very important, helping them to move towards a collaborative supply chain. And we are capable, I will say, from all type of solutions, starting with calendar management to manufacturing. Lectra is there to accompany its fashion customer and, again, their supply chain over the full cycle. So founded in 1973 with more than 1,500 employees of 50 different nationalities in 32 subsidiaries. We have the pleasure and privilege to work with more than 23,000 customers from more than 100 countries, contributing to indeed their operational excellence. Here you see some of Lectra customers, so we are really proud to present you some of them. Again, it highlights our expertise in the fashion and apparel industry, but also, you know, our expertise in automotive and furniture for sure. So to conclude, well, our goal at Lectra is really to get our clients ahead of the fashion game. We saw with David that, you know, many things are changing in the market, in the supply chain, in terms of sourcing strategy. We don't wait for things to happen. We try to help our customer to get ahead by enabling them to respond to the market indeed faster, from supply chain management to benefiting from new sourcing approaches. And by doing so, our goal is, as we see here on the slide, to really reinvent the rule of the industry together with our customer. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks both. I hope everybody enjoyed that today. We do have some questions which I'd like to put to both Françoise, to yourself, and also to David. So here's one for both of you. What is your evaluation about the level of innovation implemented in the fashion supply chain today? Is it good enough? And what are the key ones that you would suggest to look into in the short to medium term?
Well, that's a good one. Let me think, because I'm coming from, you know, I have been working in different industry. Admittedly, when I look at the fashion industry, I will say that as it has been focused very much on, you know, cost, as we saw earlier on with David, I would say that the level of innovation has not yet been as high in average as in other industries, for example, automotive. But having said that, I think we see great variances depending on the business model of the fashion company, but also the geography. Let me give you a few examples. You know, when you think about luxury, very often you think about handcraft, but in reality, when you look at the supply chain of luxury company, they are highly automated, and indeed they have been the one using extensively new technology, new processes. If you look also from on a geographical base, you see some countries that have been extremely active in implementing new processes, new technologies as well. I'm thinking in particular of Sri Lanka, who has been very strong in implementing lean, and we see also some other examples in Central America. And I'm thinking, of course, about China, in particular with the Made in China 2025 program. We see really manufacturers from China moving into more, I will say, new processes and advanced technology. So that will be my first level of answer, and I guess, David, based on the work you are currently doing with the ILO, you may have some further insight, right?
Yes. when it comes to CAD systems, computer-assisted design, when it comes to the work that Lectra does, that takes the sketch, makes the pattern, grades the pattern, you have the automatic spreading, the automatic cutting. This is innovative technology, which is now becoming a must for major garment producers. However, as you leave the cutting department and move into the sewing floor and beyond, the actual use of technology is not good. Lean manufacturing, which has been around for about 25 years, doesn't really work in most countries. People use the words, but they don't really have the follow-through. This is a big issue for the industry because as the industry shifts, as you have more cooperative relationships and more cooperative strategies, the factories that are falling behind, of which many are, especially in the countries like Bangladesh and India, they face real problems. And you know, Lectra's part of the industry actually is the shining example. They're in the forefront. The rest of the industry isn't, the rest of the work isn't being done on the same level of quality and the same technology.
That's great. Thank you both. Thanks for that answer. Right, I've got one here that I think is good for David, actually. David, will the industry change sufficiently to meet the requirements of the new consumer, or will a new industry develop to meet those specific needs? And if so, can the two industries coexist?
There is a new consumer out there. These are young people, successful people, aged about 30. They're looking at fashion in a very broad sense. They're looking at fashion not just in look. They're looking at fashion in transparency. They want to know that the factory has good compliance. They want to know that the factory is sustainable. Also, they're looking for highly specialized products. They will pay more. They will wait longer for something that's special. The industry as it exists today, based around retail stores, has to work on some sort of lowest common denominator. If you have a store in Thailand and a store in New York and a store in London all selling the same product, it's difficult to have specialized things for specialized people. In this sense, the future is going to bring a decline of the store and greater use of the internet. To date, the existing industry has not made the use of internet the way other industries have. The internet is a way of cutting out the middleman. We are not doing this. And the result is you have a new industry producing really good quality, really interesting goods at literally half the price. Whether the new industry and the old industry can learn to move into the new generation, that's open to doubt. But this is going to me, to my way of thinking, this is probably going to be the major struggle going forward.
Okay, fantastic, thanks. What would you consider is the main obstacle that's blocking change?
It's the people in the industry themselves. The people are looking to do things to have incremental change, to be more efficient, to be more productive, to be better. They don't realize that the entire industry is shifting to another direction and that it requires new skill sets. It's a problem that gets down to the individual. A guy holds a job, he's in charge of logistics for a major company. The CEO comes to him and says, oh, Mr. Wong has come to us, a valued supplier, and he wants to ship directly to the stores. So the head of logistics has two choices. He can say, this is a marvelous idea. We should do this right away. This will make a tremendous overhead and change it into a product cost. And he'll be responsible for the entire process. Or he turns and says, are you out of your mind? Who is this one character? This guy's going to bankrupt you. If you do this, you're going to be out of business. In the entire history of the garment industry, nobody's ever gone with A. Why? Because the man in charge of logistics, his job depends on what he's doing. He can't change. And this man might be earning mid six-figure salary, even a 7-digit salary, but the truth is that he has 2 kids at university, one kid in rehabilitation, and he has a mortgage on a $4 million house. It is the people within the industry, on both sides in many cases, but more on the customer side, I have to say, that is stopping the progress to be made. And in doing so, they're opening the way to these small, nimble internet companies. Guy does $3 million a year, $4 million a year, interesting goods. Individually, they mean nothing. You put 1,000 of them together, and they're going to be a dominant force in the industry.
Thank you. Okay, lovely. Right, Françoise, here's one for you. In your view, is proximity sourcing a major game changer?
Okay, I guess that is to refer to one of the slides I had. In my view, proximity sourcing is not yet set to be a major game changer. Why? Because we heard now from David. Still, China represents more than 50% of the worldwide production, with a complete infrastructure in place, but also the right skills. So skills, transport, access also to raw materials, and also very important, governmental support. I think David mentioned that also earlier on. So no, we don't think that proximity sourcing is yet set to be a major game changer. But having said that, for those companies who sit close to large consumption markets, whether you speak about Europe, typically with manufacturers in Eastern Europe, whether you speak about the US with manufacturers in Mexico and Central America, still it represents an opportunity for new businesses. Provided, again, that they change, as mentioned earlier on by David, and that they invest in new approaches, whether it's about new plant model, new value chain, or new skills that bring the value that their customers are expecting in this new cooperative, collaborative mode of operation. So it's not yet a game changer, but it can bring new opportunities for the the manufacturer who set them in a position to grab, these new opportunities.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you. Also, can you further explain what the Made in China 2025 program will change?
Oh, so Made in China 2025. So first, maybe I should explain what it is. Well, it's a broad-based strategic plan to modernize the Chinese industry. It has been released earlier this year in May 2015, and the plan was drafted by the Ministry of Industry and Information in China over 2.5 years. What will it change? It involves moving the Chinese economy away from, labor-intensive, low-cost value production towards higher value manufacturing, including innovation, integration of technology and industry, fostering Chinese brands, enforcing green manufacturing. So it's really a part of the Chinese vision of an economy that is more driven by services and smart industrial production. So what it means is that what it will change is that the industry in China will continue to upgrade. And the idea is to say that when you see a logo made in China, you think about created in China and not basically low cost.
Okay, that's great. I hope that that helps to put people's minds at rest, or at least get a bit of a deeper delve into what Made in China 2025 has in store for us. I've got a question for both Françoise and David, both of you. Are you able to quote maybe a few good practices of collaborative strategy in the fashion supply chain?
Well, I think definitely David mentioned about sustainability. That's really a key one that we see at the moment, where I will say brands, retailers, competing manufacturers, competing brands have an opportunity to collaborate together for a higher and a common goal. I don't know, David, if you want to add another practical best practice that you see from your experience.
A big one?
Do you see another good practice in terms of collaborative strategy, apart maybe from sustainability, which we mentioned earlier on?
I think the example of Ethiopia is very good. In the end of the day, the competition between customers should be over design, should be over quality, should be over price. Beyond that, there are tremendous areas of cooperation, better education in the industry. One of the difficulties we have in the new innovations, especially the work that people like Lectra are doing, is that many countries do not have the trained personnel to do this work. And this is an area of collaboration. There are areas such as the education, the training, where people should be working together. We look at, for example, areas of compliance. At this time, virtually every customer has their own standard of compliance. It drives the factories crazy. There is a move now among the customers to come together, especially in inspection for sustainability. That an inspection carried out by one company will be acceptable to all. And this is going to bring greater sustainability faster, a greater understanding of what's needed, and the ability to meet those needs. I think going forward, this business of collaboration is going to become a major factor in the industry.
Well, thank you very much for both of you answering those questions for us, and also for today's presentation. I do hope everybody's found that of interest and